of our discontents. If you're not able to join, don't worry, the video lives on Facebook and also on our website. On Tuesday, July 26, next week at noon, Mary Beulah and Jennifer Ponzer will present Erie County Career Pathway Alliance, Dynamic Collaboration Shaping Our Future Workforce. On Thursday, July 28 at 7, Kim Hill will discuss mindfulness or how to respond to life challenges in more positive ways. But today, I'm very glad to announce Deborah Gross and Phil Friedman. It is a workshop, and it's the last of a series of 3 workshops that we lined up a couple of months back. Deborah Gross comes from Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, based in Philadelphia, where she has been over 35 years practicing in federal and state courts, also all over the country, I want to add here, concentrating on complex commercial litigation. Ms. Gross also teaches at the Villanova University School of Law and received her JD from Boston University School of Law. Phil Friedman lives in Erie, if you haven't met him yet. Thank you for coming today. He is a partner at Connor, Riley, Friedman, and Weichler in Pennsylvania, Erie. He focuses his practice on federal and state criminal defense and personal injury and wrongful death litigation, and has a well-reserved reputation as a superior trial attorney. He received his Juris Doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Today, Mrs. Gross and Mr. Friedman will discuss the pros and cons of the current judicial selection process in Pennsylvania, other states' judicial selection processes, and why it is important to create a process that eliminates partisan political elections and the influences of campaigning. I want to take the time to thank you both. I wanted to thank our scholar-in-residence, our board, our staff, our members, and of course, you, our dear audience. If you're interested in becoming a member at the Jefferson or become a volunteer, please talk to our staff or take a brochure. Without your support and the Erie community, we would not be here today. So without further ado, a warm Jefferson welcome for our speakers.
So thank you very much. I'm going to turn the tables back on you as we proceed through this conversation. So I am the CEO of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, and Phil is on my board, and he's the one who informed me about the Jefferson Society and invited and suggested that I reach out to them to present. PMC has been in existence for over 35 years, originally created because of scandals in the judiciary and the result of a Beck report, a commission created by Governor Casey, appointing Judge, not Alice Beck, oh my gosh, Judge Phyllis Beck, thank you, right, head of the commission. The commission came up with a proposal that we should be, in Pennsylvania, trying to have merit selection. You know, what does that mean? You'll hear today. But since that point in time, this year, the PMC board decided to see what's going on in Pennsylvania, see what the sentiment is. And we created a judicial selection assessment committee. We call it JSAC. Everything has to have a little abbreviation, which is comprised of 30 individuals from across the state. Lawyers, non-lawyers, young, old, minority, college, works in universities, colleges, I'm trying to think what else, conservative, non-conservative, liberal, you know, all across the board. Chamber of Commerce employees, Bar Association leaders, and we have tasked them with helping to see if there's a consensus as to what's the best method for judicial selection in Pennsylvania. It could be to continue how we operate, but let's figure this out. And so what the commission has been doing is having various speakers come present to them. And so we've had, and you'll hear later, but we had a former Commonwealth Court judge, Judge Joe Cosgrove, Cosgrove talk to us about the Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania court system, which Phil is going to talk to you about a little bit, how it operates. We've had a former Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, Deborah, come speak to us. We had a Justice of the California Superior Court, Helen Zukin, come, and I'm going to tell you about their conversations. We have a former Third Circuit judge speak about the federal system. We're having a judge from Wisconsin speak about their system. I have a judge coming, a former Illinois Supreme Court judge who was, I'll say, ousted in a retention election, come speak. So we're trying to see the various methods that are in existence and maybe pick and choose from a few of them. So I'm going to turn it back to you because I want to report to them on what you have to say after hearing this conversation. So Phil, do you want to discuss the Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming today. What I can tell you, the bottom line is there is no perfect way of selecting judges. And we'd like to hear your views on what you think today. The objective is to have fair, impartial, competent judges. And how do we get to that point? And that's the question. We're honored here today to have two members of our Common Pleas Judiciary, Judge Libby Kelly and Judge Dan Brabender. I can tell you that in, I believe it was 1999, these two individuals actually ran against each other. Dan and I had been friends since before Judge Kelly was born. Judge Kelly did win that election, as she has repeatedly advised me. But fortunately, Dan went on to also win elections. So we do have two of the very finest judges here in Erie County. Just to talk a little bit about it, in Pennsylvania, we have a system of judiciary. Basically, the lowest level of our judiciary are the magistrates' courts. And many of you probably know some of these people. They're scattered around Erie County and around the state of Pennsylvania. These individuals run every 6 years. They do not run for retention. They run in contested elections. Realistically, once you're elected as a magistrate judge, you're probably there for life. It's extremely rare for any of them to lose, at least in Erie County. Although it has happened, it's very rare. The next level up is our Common Pleas judges. Common Pleas is our court of general jurisdiction. That's where almost all cases begin. Judges there are elected initially, and they serve for a period of 10 years, and then they run for what's called retention. Many of you have seen the retention votes. It just says, do you want to retain this judge or not retain? Again, generally, probably 99% of the time, judges are retained unless there's some substantial reason where a portion of the electorate decides, for whatever reason, fair or unfair, to basically attack these judges. It has happened in the past, although it's quite rare. Those are our intermediate appellate courts. All decisions that are made in the Common Pleas Court can be appealed to one of those two courts. The Commonwealth Court hears appeals of governmental determinations, workers' comp cases, unemployment comp, zoning boards. The Superior Court hears everything else. All the criminal cases, civil litigation cases go to the Superior Court. Those judges, again, run statewide in contested elections. They run in the primary and then in the general election. Once they're elected, again, they're there for a period of 10 years, at which time they run for retention. And then they win or lose at retention. Again, they almost always win the retention votes. Same with the Supreme Court. There's 7 members of that court. They run in contested elections. And after a period of 10 years, they have to run for retention. Really, the only difference between the trial courts, the Common Pleas Court, and the appeals court is at the trial court level, those individuals can run on both tickets. They can cross-file. And you'll see here in Erie County, many times an individual will win both the Republican and Democratic nomination, and then they're guaranteed to win in the fall. You cannot do that at the appellate level. In Pennsylvania, we also have the federal judiciary, which is the same across the country, but at the federal level, judges do not run for election, as you probably know. They're appointed. They're appointed by the president and have to be confirmed by the Senate. and they're there for life. Unless they're impeached, they're there for life. The system is set up such that generally the recommendations come from the senators of the president's party. And the senators will make recommendations, and they'll do it a number of different ways. Some of them set up commissions to recommend candidates to the president. But generally, when you see people that are nominated by the president at the district court level and to a degree at the circuit court level, which is the appeals court, they're coming really from the United States senators in that state. So that's basically the system we have here. We have an appointed system on one side, and we have an elected system on the other.
So first, most importantly, I mentioned this last night or the night before. If you really want to hear and learn about the various systems of judicial selection, go to the Brennan Center of NYU Law School. It is a phenomenal resource. It just issued recently a report on choosing state judges, a plan for reform. I'll be talking about what their recommendation is. But, and it talks about every state. It has a map that you'll see. I've actually copied it, so you can click on the state and learn how that state selects its judges. So, we touched upon the elections, but what are the requirements to be a judge in Pennsylvania? So, they have to be a member of the Bar of Supreme Court and a resident for 1 year. So other states have different requirements. Some states require a judge to have 10 years of practice. We don't have that in our Constitution. And those requirements of being a lawyer are for the common pleas court and the appellate courts, not the magisterial district judges. They don't have to be a lawyer. They have to be 18 years of age. They don't have to go to high school or college, but they do have to pass it's what's known as a certification test after taking a course. Now, I will tell you, I'm on the Minor Courts Judiciary Education Board because I was curious about this. In Philadelphia, we don't have magisterial district judges. We only have municipal court judges, and they do have to be lawyers. So I was curious with my new hat as CEO of PMC, what the magisterial district judges learn, in 4 weeks with 40 hours a week when I spent 3 years in law school. But I'm reserving judgment. So the program is pretty intense. It is a 1-month program. They have to go to class in Harrisburg, hear lectures, ask questions, get hypotheticals, and then pass an exam. I will tell you, I'm surprised, but I guess I shouldn't be. It is a very low pass rate, but there are, but you're allowed to try again and again. There is a limit as to how many times you can take the exam, but it isn't the easiest exam to take, which is honestly a good thing in my mind. We talk about elections, but what's behind the elections, right? To run for a judge, it costs money. The 2015 race for Supreme Court in Pennsylvania was the most expensive Supreme Court race in the country. It began the uphill or the extreme incremental increase in fundraising for Supreme Court justices. And so this is a list of what was spent, okay? And I got it from the Brennan Center report. And what's spent is for advertising, but it's not necessarily what was raised. The judges have to file campaign finance reports with the state. There are no limitations on how much a judge can raise, other than the Code of Judicial Conduct. But there are no limitations on how much a judge can raise. So in 2015, Justice Wecht raised $3.1 million. Justice Dougherty raised $4.7 million. Justice Lazarus only raised $500,000, and Justice Donahue raised $2 million. So there were some other judges who also ran, other candidates who also ran for the Supreme Court. Their numbers were under 100,000. So which three do you think won for the 3 seats for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court? The ones who spent the most, right. And Judge Lazarus is a judge on our Superior Court, and she is very qualified, but she didn't spend enough money, honestly, right? So then 2017. Now, 2015, we had 3 seats up for election in our Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It was exceedingly unusual. You don't have that many seats. Also, it changed the balance of the court, so it was a very important election to the Democrats, I'll be honest. So they supported their candidates and made sure that they got out behind their candidates. Excuse me. In 2017, there was only 1 seat, and it wasn't, no, that's not true, there's 2 seats. It was 2 seats, and no, it's 1, only 1 seat, right, okay. It was only 1 seat, and it wasn't as an expensive an election. And Justice Mundy won that seat. Justice Todd spent a lot of money for a retention election. As Phil said, retention elections usually aren't contested. They're usually sort of, I'll say, sleepers. We've only not retained, I think, 2, or maybe 3. I think it's 2 of our Supreme Court justices, and one of which was a backlash to a proposed pay raise. And this just discusses the amount of monies that were raised in the ads, right? So then, and this is how much money they raised. And then in 2021, right? So even though we say odd number years are judicial election years, there's not always a judicial election. It depends on when, a judge sits for a 10-year term. If a judge retires before that 10-year term, there's a vacancy. Sometimes it's filled. In Pennsylvania, that vacancy is filled by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate, or the seat could be empty if there's only maybe 1 year left, and it would go to the next election. So in 2021, which was just last year, there was, a $1.6 million spent on the campaign. It wasn't expected to be a high spending campaign year because it was 1 seat, it wasn't influential, it was to replace the Chief Justice Tom Saylor's seat. So if a Democrat won, it wouldn't change the balance, but Justice Saylor was a Republican, so there was hope that that seat would be filled by a Republican. The parties got involved in fundraising, but not only the parties. There were some private, we call them dark money, or PACs, political action committees, that don't have to report in the same manner as a judge's campaign committee. And so what happened was, there was a contentious ad in 2021 that was that was put out in support of Judge Brobson's candidacy for the Supreme Court. Judge Brobson was a current Commonwealth Court judge, so as I'll show you shortly, he was under certain judicial code of conduct canons when he raised money and how he advertised, but one of the political action campaign, one of the PACs that was supporting him, put the ad out. Does that make a difference? It might. So he ran a TV ad that said his Democratic opponent, Judge McLaughlin, chose to void the guilty plea of a drunk driver who admitted to killing a pregnant woman and her unborn child. That's pretty grabbing, headline grabbing. But she was only one of 3 judges, right? There wasn't any explanation of the case, and it was just, I'll say, a snippet of what happened. So when candidates run for appellate court judicial office, as Jay Silverblatt told us on Monday, the Pennsylvania Bar Association has a process to review the candidates and make a determination as to how to recommend them. So it's a recommend, not recommend, or very qualified. Qualified, very qualified, or not recommended. So they had recommended, Judge Brobson recommended Judge McLaughlin, but and all their investigation and research is usually confidential. Okay, the recommended, not recommended, and highly recommended are disclosed, but what goes into it is not disclosed. But somehow there was a leak, and so and this came out in reporting from the Inquirer, because I remember being contacted by the Inquirer, and the Pennsylvania Bar Association apparently had reached out to Judge Brobson's campaign to say that that ad crossed the line. It violated standards of accuracy and integrity, and that his campaign should withdraw the ad. The ad was subsequently withdrawn. Nevertheless, the campaign did still issue a statement about how she chose to join the opinion that voided the defendant's guilty plea. So, this is a concern with judicial elections. A lot of snippets or pieces of an entire picture can get out there. So what rules, do judges running for election have to follow? Because this is for political and campaign activities of judicial candidates. There could be an argument that it only applies to those sitting as a current judge, but it does apply to all judicial candidates. And it talks about that they shall act in a manner consistent with the independent integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. They will comply with all applicable election campaign fundraising laws, and they will review and approve the content of all campaign statements and materials produced by the candidate or his or her campaign committee. So that's important, because that ad didn't come from the judge or his campaign committee, but there's then this number 4 that says, and take reasonable measures to ensure that other persons do not undertake on behalf of the candidate activities, other than those described in Rule 4.4. So, if the judge or his campaign didn't know about the ad until it was aired, the judge couldn't take any or his campaign couldn't take any action until after. So, there are these loopholes that do exist out there, but Judge Brobson's campaign did withdraw that ad. So, and this is just simply commentary about the rule of conduct, and it's available. The code of judicial conduct is available on the court's website, pacourts.us. It's a great website for information. So, as I mentioned, how are judicial vacancies filled? Because we elect our judges, but there are vacancies. And recently, in the past month, I would say Governor Wolf nominated over a dozen individuals to fill judicial vacancies. So that the governor actually nominates somebody. They have an office of general counsel. The governor has an office of general counsel who has a website, who takes applications to be judges. There is a committee that is in Governor Wolf's office. I will say I know how it's done. I don't think this was as formalized with respect to prior governors, but they actually have this website. You submit an application. There are guidelines as to how the governor will make this appointment. There are interviews. There's a committee. The governor is focused on diversity, not only of ethnicity, but also of legal practice, of geography. But the governor has fully disclosed on his website. There's no more. It's not there anymore because there's no more. He's not nominating anybody else. But it was fully disclosed as to who should apply for this position. So we're not the only state. Last night, somebody asked me about how many states have partisan elections for Supreme Court, and I wasn't sure of that number. The number is 7, but what's interesting is that number only became 7 last year. Ohio used to have nonpartisan elections. The Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice is a woman. She is a Republican. She actually spoke at the at the Supreme Court's 300th anniversary celebration, which was in Pennsylvania, which was in Philadelphia at the Constitution Center last month. She is a tough cookie. She was wonderful as a presenter, but she decided to retire because there was a campaign. She was up for retention election, and even though it was at that point when she was originally going, it was originally going to be a nonpartisan retention election. The legislature changed it to partisan because they were out to get her, because she had thrown out a number of voter redistricting maps that the Republican legislature had proposed. And they were out to get her. I mean, so she decided to step down. She had enough of politics. But Ohio was a nonpartisan judicial election system until last year. And so the other courts are Illinois, which also I should note elects its judicial candidates by district. And again, because even though it's electing it by district and it's a partisan, Illinois recently also a justice of the Supreme Court was focused on being thrown out of office because of a decision that he rendered. So, it's a concern. These are the various methods of judicial selection, right? We have partisan elections. There's only 7 in the country that have partisan elections. There are nonpartisan elections. There is legislative appointment, gubernatorial appointment. There's what's known as the Missouri Plan, and then I call the California hybrid, which I'll explain all these, and then we, as Phil discussed, the federal system, which is a, quote, merits system. So this is an amazing map that is available, and I didn't put the site, on the Brennan Center website, which color codes each of the various methods of judicial selection, and when you click on the map, it explains each state's judicial selection method. So nonpartisan elections, that sounds sort of like, can it really be? And I'm not sure it really can be. But in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court judges, there are 7 of them, have 10-year terms, and there's only 1 justice elected in any year. That's written into the Wisconsin Constitution. Eligibility, remember we talked about that, because here there's a requirement that the attorney be for 5 years. I mean, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, you don't have any kind of tenure requirement as an attorney. All you have to do is pass the bar. There are no retention elections, so you have to run again, but it's a nonpartisan election. Is there a primary? There's only a primary if there's more than 1 candidate running for that seat. And so when I was looking at articles about the election system, they talked about conservative and liberal judges. They didn't talk about Democrat and Republican judges. But there was an article about how Wisconsin has become a very expensive election system. So in 2015, there was a contested Supreme Court election. The incumbent was Justice Ann Bradley, and she was facing a lower court judge, James Daly, and neither judge declared themselves as a D or an R, but there was a view out there about their positions that they were either conservative or liberal. One justice, Justice Bradley, refused to take money from any party to support her position that she was nonpartisan. The other candidate did take political backing. And that was in 2015. Then recently, again, there was a contested election in Wisconsin between the incumbent Justice Kelly and a challenger, Jill Karofsky. She actually did win. She received 55.3% of the vote versus Kelly's 44.7% of the vote. But it was a highly contested, election, even though it was nonpartisan. So, is there such a thing as a nonpartisan election? What's interesting is that the Wisconsin Bar Association back in 2013 was concerned with this nonpartisan, elections. And so they created a task force to study the method of selection. I haven't yet heard from them. We're hearing from them in September. But what they recommended was that they keep nonpartisan elections because they felt elections were important to get, it's important to communicate with the voters, for voters to understand what judges do, who they are, but that it should be a single term for 16 years. Again, is that really enough? Does somebody want to run? Would somebody who's qualified, who's capable, want to run for only one 16-year term? It's a question. I've heard from many judges that why should they put their career on hold, take a salary cut to run for only one 16-year election? This never got anywhere. The Bar Association supported it, many of the State Bar Association, many of the county bar associations. It got no traction in its legislature. Okay, the next method of judicial selection is legislative appointment. It is rare, exceedingly rare. It only exists in 2 states, Virginia and South Carolina. And I'll go back to that map. It's interesting because there are certain areas of the map where certain judicial selection methods are more common. So here I'll say we're in the South. The South Carolina Supreme Court has 5 judges. They're each given a 10-year term. There is a nominating committee that makes a recommendation to the legislature. The nominating committee, one sometimes hopes or thinks that that's an independent nominating committee. It's not here. The majority is comprised of members of the General Assembly. So this is clearly a political beast. But it's rare, but it does exist. Gubernatorial appointments. So the Brennan Center gave this as 10 states. I'm going to say it's a little more because the gubernatorial appointment system, some states overlap with I'll say a merit selection system, so you'll see. But it's different. What that means differs state by state. So we had Chief Justice Deborah Porritzen. She used to be the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court. And when I spoke to her on the phone, she thinks our system is one of the best systems, really qualified judges, really diverse. That was my initial conversation with her. Then she started preparing for our meeting and her presentation, and she came to the presentation saying, well, I've given this some thought, and there are differences in New Jersey between what is written and what is unwritten. And I'm not so sure I'm a fan. Now I've spoken to other judges and justices around and doing my homework, I'm not so sure I'm such a fan of New Jersey. But the reason why she was a fan was that she thought, again, the appointment is a complete decision by the governor. But there is this judicial advisory panel that's comprised of 7 members, 5 of which are former judges. And she felt that because there were these 5 former judges, and she knew was familiar with the investigation and vetting practice, she felt that was why it was so important. However, that judicial advisory panel sits at the behest of the governor, and it has no authority or power, and it could get eliminated simply by a governor executive order. Or alternatively, they could all resign. So when Governor Christie, so even when you are up for retention, for your term as a New Jersey Supreme Court judge is 7 years. Then you're up for renomination by the governor. So Governor Christie decided that when Supreme Court Justice Wallace, who was the second black Supreme Court judge in New Jersey, was up for renomination, he decided not to reappoint him for no reason other than he was the wrong party. Okay, nothing to do with his qualifications. The entire panel resigned, but it didn't matter, right? They had no weight, no authority, no pull. You know, it was a gubernatorial decision.
Debbie, who appoints the commission?
The governor. But it's an executive order from Governor Corzine. So that executive order, and his executive order said it's 7 members, 5 of which are former judges. But that executive order could be changed by a governor. So it's a incestuous, I'll say, kind of appointment system. She also said what was interesting is that there was an unspoken practice called senatorial courtesy. So if the senator in the district from which the proposed nominee, gubernatorial nominee, objects to that individual, the Senate as an entirety will not approve that nomination. So there has been for over a year in New Jersey, a female that was proposed by the governor as a Supreme Court justice, but her senator has objected. I don't know why, so she has not been nominated. Okay, another example of a gubernatorial appointment is New York. This is a little, I'll say a little fairer. Their highest court is the Court of Appeals. Their lowest court is the Supreme Court. It's intentionally confusing. It's a 14-year term. They have a judicial nominating commission. It consists of 12 members who are appointed by the governor. 12 members, 4 of whom are appointed by the governor, 4 of whom are appointed by the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, 1 by the speaker, 1 by the Speaker of the Assembly, 1 by the temporary president, 1 by the minority leader, and 1 of the Senate, and 1 by the minority leader of the Assembly. So it's not as political. It still has political involvement, right? But it does have, judges who are, or it does have appointments by the chief judge. But again, this is how a judge gets appointed, so the judge is sort of a political appointee, even though it's not necessarily. So there's a limitation, as to what political party, like the governor can only appoint 2 from the same political party. Similarly, from the chief judge, they can only appoint 2 of any political party. There can't be any political involvement of any current political involvement, I'll say, of any member of the Judicial Commission. Once the governor, appoints, right, it then has to be approved by the Senate. But he only can appoint from those recommended by the commission. And I'm pointing that out because there's another state we'll discuss where the governor doesn't necessarily have to appoint from those recommended by a commission. So there's so many different machinations, I'll say, of gubernatorial appointment. The Missouri plan of judicial selection, you hear that all the time. It refers to a merit selection appointment with a retention election. So the candidate is appointed based on merit, typically as a result of a vetting and a recommendation from a judicial nominating committee. And then after the initial term in office, the judge is up for a retention election, and a retention election means a yes or a no. And it's typically, and I have to say typically because every state is so different, but it's typically not a contested election. And when you look at the map, it's sort of a Midwest kind of thing. I don't know why, but that's what happened. So the Missouri Plan came into existence in the 1940s. And so this just talks about the state of Missouri. It has a nonpartisan judicial commission which reviews applications, does an investigation. It's called the Appellate Judicial Commission, and it's comprised of 3 lawyers elected by the Missouri Bar, 3 citizens selected by the governor, and the Chief Justice. So this, on its face, right, really does appear separated from politics. And that's why this plan is one of the stronger plans that was pushed and has more states that follow it. The plan then the commission then submits the name of 3 qualified candidates to the governor, okay? The governor has to interview them. He or she does his own investigation and should usually pick one. However, if the governor decides not to appoint one of the panelists, the commission actually selects one of the panelists. This is very unusual. In Missouri, the retention election is typically more than one after a judge has been sitting for 1 year. But if there's a vacancy in that term, and maybe it's only 1 year, the retention election could be after that 1 year. What's also interesting is that Missouri has a judicial performance evaluation committee. We don't have that here. We rely on the bar associations. But that committee is made up of lawyers and non-lawyers. It evaluates objective criteria, and it issues the results of their investigation, and they send them out to the League of Women Voters and the internet. So it's the Missouri itself takes care of providing this kind of information to its voters. Utah is another example of a Missouri plan judicial selection, but it's a little different. But in their constitution, they say selection of judges shall be based solely upon consideration of fitness for office without regard to any partisan political consideration. It's in their constitution. So they too have a judicial nominating commission. It consists of 7 commissioners appointed by the governor to serve a single 4-year term. Must be a U.S. citizen, a resident of the district. They may not be a member of the legislature, and no more than 4 commissioners may be from the same political party. The governor must appoint 2 commissioners from nominees from the Utah State Bar Association, but he may not appoint more than 4 members of the Utah State Bar. So it can be a non-political judicial commission. And then, again, in Utah, they have a judicial performance evaluation commission. It is not run by a state bar association or a county bar association that evaluates candidates and makes recommendations to the voters as to whether to retain or not retain a judge. Okay, California is a beast unto itself, is the only way to say it. But again, California has the largest number of judges in the country. We had a woman named Helen Zukin, who's a Superior Court judge in LA County, come speak to us. She was phenomenal. She thinks their method of selection is, the best, and there are a number of people who do think that as well. The Supreme Court term is 12 years. The process is that the governor submits names of nominees to a commission of judicial nominee evaluation of the state bar. The governor has actually has an office, I forget what it's called, but it's an office that is only responsible for governor nominees, for everything, for judges, for secretaries of state, for every position that a governor appoints, there is somebody who heads that office. And they have a process where they take applications, but they can't decide, right? So the governor typically then will send a batch of nominees to this Commission of Judicial Nominee Evaluation. This commission is huge. It's comprised of 27 members. It is attorneys and non-attorneys. It shall be broadly representative of the ethnic, gender, and racial diversity of the population of California, and it's also emphasized to be representative of legal practice areas. So it is, while there's no limitation as to politics, according to this judge, it is a non-political entity. She's served on it, she's also done a lot, and I'll tell you about this. But in California, their concern was with getting diverse candidates to be nominated by the governor, and it's an intimidating process. And people think, oh, I'm not qualified, I'm not known, how do I do this? So California actually has a mentoring program for judicial nominees, not after you become a judge, but before. And they have a process where they accept applications, they appoint a mentor judge, and they have a whole training program to give potential nominees confidence that they can be nominated. So what does that judicial commission do? It gives a rating and a recommendation. It's not a number, but it's qualified, very qualified, not qualified. If the governor were to appoint somebody who was not recommended by this commission, the commission is allowed to disclose its investigation and full report as to why it found this individual not recommended. So as you can imagine, as far as she could think, there was no person that the governor proposed to appoint that was ever not recommended by this commission. Once the governor, so the governor makes nominees, goes to this commission, they do their research, they say, who's qualified. From that grouping, the governor then can make an appointment, but it doesn't end there. Then the appointment is reviewed by another committee, and that committee is comprised of the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, of the California Attorney General, which is a political office, and the third depends on what court that judge is vying for or will be appointed for. So, and that committee, the Commission on Judicial Appointments, makes a determination and its own investigation. It has public hearings, and that committee makes a determination whether the candidate is recommended or qualified. If that committee determines that the candidate is not qualified, that's the end. That candidate cannot be appointed by the governor. It has never happened because, in all likelihood, because of the thoroughness of the prior committee, the J&E investigation, but there is, it is a two-committee process that hopes to take it away from politics. Now, saying that, most of Californians are Democrats. There may not be as many Republicans, out there who are vying for a position in the judiciary. But there are Republicans that are nominated by Democratic governors for these judicial positions. So at the end of the appointed term, there are retention elections. And those retention elections are not simply yes or no. They can be contested. So if they're not contested, there's actually not even an election. It's sort of a misnomer. But if they're contested, it is a heated battle. And it's, if there were 2 Supreme Court justice positions that were up for retention election, and there was one contestant, that contestant actually has to challenge a specific judge. Not both, but only one. So the second one would be not contested and not even appear on the ballot. And then Phil discussed our federal system. It's, again, supposed to be merits, but it's what's the, actually, I don't know if I can say this or not, but I can say, I know I went through this process because I applied. I was told, I'm not from the right district, I'm not this, I'm not the right age, so it's not necessarily all merits-based, but I do have confidence in the federal bench in Pennsylvania and Third Circuit. It is a lifetime appointment. As we know, there's a lot of discussion now about whether that should continue, because when the Supreme Court lifetime appointment was written into the Constitution, the age, somebody's life expectancy was not, over 80. So, and that's my presentation, but I want to hear from you. What do you think, right? What pieces do you think would be the best judicial selection method in Pennsylvania? I keep turning. There's a woman next to you.
Thanks, Linda. Well, I have a story. I'll keep it short. A number of years ago, the Democratic women of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party have a forum for candidates every year. So several years ago, there was the appellate judges. There were a couple openings on this one. So there were 8 candidates. So I listened very attentively to all of them, and they all sounded wonderful and very intelligent, except for one. He was really, really off on everything. And so afterwards, I decided I would approach him and have a deeper conversation with him. And sure enough, I was like, is he drunk? Is he high? I mean, even his vocabulary was really off. And that person was the highest vote getter that year in Erie County. So I decided at that point, we just are not qualified, the voters. Most of us don't know, and actually now when I vote for judges on those levels, I've met them, I like them, but what do I know? Right. So that's my opinion. We shouldn't be voting for judges.
How do you think we should select them?
Well, I kind of like the California. I think the experts, if we can take politics out of it as much as possible and allow the people that really understand the true qualifications, not just whether you like somebody personally, I think that would be better.
Good afternoon. Nice presentation. Very interesting to see how the different states really come to the determination. And everything I was listening to, I partially agree with the previous comment, especially when it comes down to the California method. On the flip side of that, I do think that the people, especially people of diversity, really need to have someone in those roles that they can trust. Yep. So I like the California method, and I think having people that represent the entire community is definitely the way to go. The only question I have is, it seems like it's such a process, and it could take a lot of time to get to a determination.
So there are time constraints that are put on these commissions in California. But you're right, it could be a long time, right? Especially because there's a lot of judges that have to be appointed.
Ready? Yeah. I don't have any answers or suggestions to your big analysis there. It was very well done. I've been a practicing lawyer for 45 years here locally, and I do have two sort of simple suggestions based on that experience. One, I strongly feel that magisterial district justices should be attorneys. I'll leave it at that. And the second one, I think that there ought to be a practice minimum before someone runs for common pleas justice, or a judge, or appellate judge. And I saw one of the states has a 10-year. Before I was 40, and I'm a long way from that now, I used to say it ought to be a 20-year minimum, maybe 20, no less than 10. But for somebody to learn on the job, common pleas court, which is dealing with people's lives every day, they need to have that background and experience.
The bar associations, I know the Philadelphia Bar Association, when it rates judges, will give a judge will give a candidate not recommended automatically if they have less than 10 years experience. But that's the Philadelphia Bar Association, and that's for a Philadelphia Common Pleas judge. But I don't know what other counties or bar associations do.
I'm really just going to make some comments reflecting kind of like just a typical voter, because I'm not a lawyer, have nothing to do with the legal system. I have a very large family, and a lot of the younger ones have grown up, so there's 40 or 50 voting people here in Erie. And I've been away for many years, but came back. When I came back to Pennsylvania, although I like to be informed, and I have more time than others for various reasons, so I try to do a little research, but life gets in the way, and I've been back for like 4 years. But every election, up until maybe the very last one, I'm calling my one sister who, she and her husband are a bit more involved in the local scene, and I didn't have time to do research, so I called her up and said, look, particularly the local elections, school board, I don't have any kids. I said, who should I vote for? I want to vote for with some intelligence. You need to tell me because I don't have time to read about it. That was my general thing.
So you think it should be taken
away? But when it
from
came to the judges, this is just interesting because I was here Monday night, but not yesterday. So at the last election or two, when there were judges on retention on the ballot, and I didn't even know what retention meant, but then I realized what it meant. But I remember how this was, and we're all mostly Democrats, okay? So, and there's a lot of arguing going on the family text messaging system all the time around politic times or voting times. But I remember that I was outraged because we were all outraged about how the Democrats had to get people in office and forget the credentials. If they have a D, that's bottom line. If you don't have time to research and be informed, the rule is just vote Democrat because chances are you're doing better than something else. That's been our kind of mantra. I see these 6 or 8 judges, though, for retention, no notice of party. I remember I'm calling up a few families saying, do you know what they are, what they were? Because I thought, more than anything, I want to be able to vote for Democratic judges, and if these were not Democrats to begin with, I need to vote no on the retention.
Or you need to figure out.
And I passed that around. I did enough research. There was one I couldn't figure out. I had to ask someone, found out what they were, and I sent to this whole big family.
But see, there are, in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
The retention election is supposed to be nonpartisan.
Right.
And you should be, right, voting on somebody's qualifications.
Right. Well, that's
but we don't have a commission, a statewide commission,
Yeah.
that is responsible for even educating the public.
One of my takeaways from the Monday night thing was, oh my God, I made a big mistake. I need to recommunicate with this big family for this upcoming election and tell them, look, I was wrong on my guidance on retention elections. You need to go to the Bar Association, see what they say about them, and do it more based on their voting record. So that was my takeaway Monday.
Yeah.
But I didn't do that yet because I thought, wait a minute, maybe I'll learn something today, and I better wait till I have all the information before I send something out on this family communication thing. But I just thought that was interesting that, that's the way, it kind of supports yours. What do we know? We're trying to do the right thing.
And you all want to be educated, right?
I try to be, but there's just too much information.
Some voters have no interest, like they go to, again, we don't get that many voters that go to the polls for judicial elections.
Right.
When they go in, they didn't even realize they're voting for a judge. They vote based on how the name sounds.
Right. But the other good takeaway I had that I'm also going to include in this communication is the business about the amendments and the fact that the default going in position, which I agreed with, is you think it's been vetted and you vote yes. if you had no time to really think about it or know what's behind the scenes. And I'm going to be saying, don't ever do that again. And in fact, I'm going to warn them about these ones coming up.
Right.
But my point is that I just said, just don't ever assume ever again. Look for somebody who's
Do
a bars or
research,
whatever to
yeah.
recommend
Yep.
to go in with a little bit of forethought rather than just assuming. So those are my two important takeaways.
Thank you.
I think there's a big difference between voting for local common pleas.
Yeah, I don't think you're on. Are you on?
I'm on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
I think I was next.
I think there's a substantial difference between common pleas judges who are all from Erie County versus statewide judges. I think, in my view, the election system, at least countywide, is the best way to go. Most of us can find out about these people. Just ask other people who are members of the bar, and they can pretty much give you a good indication of these people. But I agree, on the state level, it's quite different. And on retentions, I'd look at the PBA, on the Judicial Evaluation Commission, because they're very complete.
I can tell you, in the last retention election, there was what is she? There was a judge, either Superior or Commonwealth Court, I can't remember, who refused to submit to the Pennsylvania Bar Association for a review. So to me, that sort of put up a trigger, an alarm. Like, why did that judge not agree to a review? I did my own homework, but that's even that is something that should be looked at.
And it isn't that easy. I served on the Judicial Evaluation Commission. You can look at a judge and say, well, they've got great credentials. They graduated from Harvard University. They went to Yale Law School. They clerked for a Supreme Court justice. And they were running for an appellate court. And now their judicial philosophy is originalism. We're going to go back and look at, what the founding fathers did in the 18th century. Well, you can agree or disagree with that and say, well, this person's competent, but their judicial philosophy is so contrary to everything I believe in. Are they qualified or not qualified? Maybe they're qualified, but is it somebody you want to vote for?
I always say to people, see what they do outside of practicing law. See how they give back. I really think that helps form somebody, life experiences are invaluable.
So thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to note, I think a 10-year experience is good. I think 20 years, you won't have any youth representing the judges, so I think that would be terrible. And yeah, I think to me the biggest thing when I think about judges, especially in the higher courts, they are people who come from a certain pedigree and, went to Harvard, went to Yale, and know the right people. And I think California has a great system with starting mentorship before people become judges, because that allows the representation. Like, not only among judges do our courts lack representation in race and gender, but I think most of all is life experiences. How many of them can relate to the people that they're judging, or have themselves or family members been in situations where they were judged. So I think, the whole having a certain pedigree and qualifications, and I think we just need a lot more diversity overall. So I really like California's method, especially with the mentorship, because that allows for diversity to actually happen.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
I want to bring up geography in Pennsylvania again, because there are some other states, perhaps like New York, that are like Pennsylvania, that are divided into very distinct geographic areas. And of course, in Pennsylvania, it's Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia, and Erie kind of hangs on Pittsburgh. Is it true, as I think, that when candidates appear on the ballot for judicial office, they're always identified by county.
Right.
So it's pretty easy to tell where a person's from. And is it true that what I think is that those of us in Western Pennsylvania always vote for people from Western Pennsylvania? We don't care what party they're from, because we want representation on the court. Is that
So
true?
it's completely true. And there was talk at some point, because it's not a constitutional amendment, I think it's just a rule or a statute or a law, to get rid of the designation of geography
Please don't do
because most of the Supreme Court is not from Philadelphia. There is one justice currently from Philadelphia. Last name is Doherty. He's a great judge. I think Kevin's wonderful, but he got there because of his name.
Well, you have to remember, from Pittsburgh's point of view, Harrisburg is suburban Philadelphia.
But Harrisburg doesn't like Philadelphia either.
But in the nominating process, is there any attention paid to geography in Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania, well, there's no nominating process, right? It's just election. So there's no, the parties themselves. So, for example, in 2021's Supreme Court election, the proposed Democratic candidates were just Maria McLaughlin, who's a Superior Court judge, and Carolyn Nichols, who's a Superior Court judge, both of whom are from Philly, both of whom are very qualified, and there was not, I do not think there was not another judge from the Democrats from the western part of the state.
I see.
What generally happens is the Republican Party's much more disciplined.
Yeah.
Their state committee will pick candidates
Yep.
to run, and everybody else will drop out. So there usually is not a contested primary on the Republican side.
Although the last primary for the Supreme Court position was contested.
It
Well,
can
not,
be.
yeah,
But usually the endorsed
Right,
candidate
right.
wins. And I don't think it's true, as true as you indicate, that people just vote on geography. I think it used to be more true than it is now. But I think people look beyond that at this point.
What happens if a judge is up for retention and is not retained? There's a vacancy.
there's a vacancy.
How is that vacancy filled?
The governor gets to appoint that person until the next, judicial election.
Yeah, and that person can run again in the contested election.
As a member of the Erie County Bar, let me thank both Debbie and Phil for an outstanding job. How grateful we are that, Debbie, that you came from this distance and that Jay Silverblatt came from Pittsburgh. As far as Erie County is concerned, as I said the other night, we're blessed with excellent trial judges in the Court of Common Pleas, even though they were elected, and we're also blessed with a terrific federal judge in Susan Paradise Baxter and Rich Lanzillo, who's the magistrate, and all the prior judges. But you should also know that I believe two of our district,
Appellate court.
the lower judiciary, don't we have two lawyers now in that position, Phil?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Gary.
In the appellate courts?
I'm sorry?
Or in the appellate courts?
No.
Oh.
The magistrates.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, there's more than two.
Justice of the,
There's more than two, yeah.
okay, so, and that's a big step up from when I began practicing 50 years ago. So we do have lawyers serving in that
We
capacity.
do, and honestly, I would disagree with Dick on that. I think some of the very good magistrates are not lawyers.
Yes,
But it just depends on the individuals.
correct. And also, a shout out to our Bar Association. We do a terrific job in evaluating those people that are running for position.
So does your bar association, the Philly Bar Association, when we evaluate people, takes once non-lawyers to join us? So does
Yes.
Erie?
Yes.
No,
Plebiscite.
it's just, it's a plebiscite.
No, it's just a plebiscite, I'm sorry.
Okay,
But, so,
okay, thank you.
I also like the California plan. My concern with elected judges is that amount of money that is being spent, and in my opinion, undue influence. Unfortunately, a lot of voters do not know who they're voting for. It's a sad truth, because people are just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I think the experts should be appointing these people.
I always like to say, I wish all the money that was raised in elections and campaigns would go to those who really need the money.
Exactly.
The problem is, when you go to that system, you talk about the experts. I don't know who those experts are.
No, I know.
That's what concerns me. If they gave me the right to decide who all the judges were, I think that would be a great system.
Sure.
But unfortunately, it doesn't
No,
work that way.
I understand. There's no
You
perfect
have to
system.
be careful, because what happens is, when you have a small group of people that are making all these decisions,
Right.
it can be quite disconcerting.
I think it's better when you have a larger nominating commission that's not politically focused.
Sure.
Maybe politics has to play some part. Maybe there has to be somebody nominated from the speaker and the head of the assembly, but outnumber them is the only way to say it, by others.
We have two judges here right now, both of who ran for office. Maybe you could talk about that process.
Well, I agree with you, Phil, that at the local level and with the minor judiciary, that the citizens should vote. Although there's even problems with that. I know in Allegheny County, they have, I think, 43 common pleas judges, and when there's an election, it's almost always a Democrat that wins. And the Democrats that win are the only ones that are endorsed by the Democratic Party. And whether or not they get that endorsement is in direct relation to how much money they contribute to the Allegheny County Democratic Party. So whoever donates the most money, generally speaking, wins those elections. I'm not sure if it's that way in Philadelphia. I know Philadelphia has, I think, 96 common pleas
Right.
judges.
They're all Democrats.
Yeah.
There are a few that are, I don't even think there are a few. There's maybe one or two that
Yeah.
could be. But Allegheny County, I will tell you, this last election year, some judges joined together to say, we're not giving money back to the Democratic Party. We're running as Democrats, but we're running sort of as our own group and our own ticket. And a number of them, actually one of the judges used to be on our board as well, won. So it's slowly changing, but you're right.
But I think at the appellate level, even the lawyers don't know the people that are running for those jobs more often than not. And when you talk about geography, what did they say? We have a very large city in Philadelphia, we have a large city in Pittsburgh, and then the rest of the state is Alabama. And, so it's a lot different in those big cities than opposed to the rural areas. But the problem I see with having so-called merit selection or having a committee of elites selecting these people, that will turn out to be more political than just a regular general election. Those are my thoughts, at least. But put it this way, I'm happy that I did get voted in, although the first time I ran, Elizabeth Kelly did handily defeat me. But I feel if it was a committee that had to select the people, I'd have never had a chance in the world, I guarantee you that.
I personally do not like the title merit selection. I think it then implies that there are candidates who have no merit, right? That just digs me in the craw. I think a committee of judicial selection, a committee that that has publicly is transparent with the requirements, with who's on this committee, is not overwhelmingly political, would be a better, would be more fair, but that merit selection name also really is
Well,
concerning.
I think whatever you call it, if you
Yeah.
have a committee
Yeah.
or whatever it is, it's going to be very political regardless. That's my belief.
In the past, it was always, it was always white Christian males who were members of big firms. They're the ones that got the appointments.
Right.
Maybe that's changed, but it depends who's appointing. It really does.
Well, I didn't have a lot to say until someone brought up the question of money. And it never occurred to me that that those people who are suggesting, I'm talking about on a quote merit system, has a lot to do with how much money they contributed to their party.
No, that's not for merit. That was for the election.
Yeah, but didn't you just say something about in the Allegheny, it had a lot to do with how much money somebody contributed to the party?
Yeah.
So this is a big concern to me because as it is, our legislators already spend more than 50% of their time dialing for dollars.
Right.
And to think that could be how their expertise is decided on based on how many dollars they manage to get going into the coffers would be a terrible thing. So I guess I would like to see something that sort of says you can't put money in.
Mm-hmm.
I like that guy who said, no, we're not contributing.
Right.
I'd like to see more along that line.
It's still about money, no matter how you do it. You have to raise money to run for any office. So if you're a judicial candidate statewide or even in Erie County, you have to raise a substantial amount of money to do that, or you don't have a chance.
Well, and I think that is problematic, and this has to do with elections in general.
Right.
I used to think, oh heavens, no, I don't want to see us start having the government pay for elections. But I have since changed my mind on that because, first of all, we wouldn't all be inundated with 15 million tons of advertising and phone calls.
And text messages.
And text messages or whatever else. If there was a limited amount that was provided by the government to conduct elections, period, end of statement, I personally would like to see us do that. I think we'd all be better off.
Campaign finance reform.
And then the problem you have is these outside groups come in and run hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of ads to attack one candidate or another. We don't even know who they are. The Committee for Justice. Who is this? Who's funding it?
Right. And they don't have to disclose
They don't
it.
have to tell us. So there's no easy answer.
Oh, that's right. I was gonna say.
Right. 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 And the Supreme Court did issue a decision that said, fundraising is sort of free speech, right? And that, you can, the money raised is okay.
And in response to Phil's question, I will say this, and that is, I don't have the answer either, but having these kinds of discussions are extraordinarily valuable because it opens all of us to possibilities that we can then discuss. But with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to thank Phil and Debbie. But to say this also, I think two issues that we missed or haven't hit upon that we need to focus on is getting young people educated and out to vote. And I think having this kind of information from Debbie and Phil help us educate young people and encourage them to vote. Because if we look at the median age of this room, we're not the future. We're there now, but we're not the future. The other thing I will say, and I heard a couple people talk about this, I am our senior judge on the bench now, so I have the big courtroom. Every day I sit on that courtroom, and this hits on something Phil said. I look back on the back wall, I look at a bunch of old white guys, because that's the only people who were ever judges. And I am so looking forward to the day when some judge sits on the bench and sees someone of color, a woman, someone of an alternative sexual preference, not a bunch of old white guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a little anecdote on the geographic locations. It's kind of a funny story. I went to new judges school with a fellow from Allegheny County, and he was appointed to an unexpired term, and he served for about a half a year. So he had to be on the ballot for the next year. And he was from Ohio Township in Allegheny County. And they did not put a township or city designation, and it said Mike Marmo, and he's from Ohio. And all the people said, well, they're not going to vote this guy, he's from another state. So consequently, he did lose, even though he was the incumbent. But then the next time he ran, he sued to have them put Ohio Township on the ballot, and then he did win election. And I think he's even retired by now.
Wow. That's funny. Okay.
Well, looks like we are getting closer to the conclusion here. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and having a professional conversation about a very important topic. And I just want to add that a few years back, the Jefferson actually had a event here where judges came in, presented themselves and their merits and their background. So maybe it's time to do that next year, I believe, right? In 23, there is an election.
There is so next year's judicial elections, there'll be common police court judges. There will be one seat for the Supreme Court, and because Justice Baer has to retire, and I don't know what's happening yet for Superior Commonwealth Court.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank
But I
you.
can tell you, PMC does hold judicial candidate forums. We used to hold them in person. We are now doing them by Zoom because we have, they can be broadcast statewide, and we get a tremendous amount of attendance, and we take questions from the audience.
That is an advantage because I think of all the ones we invited, like 6 or 7, maybe 3 came because Erie is not very central. So thank you so much, and thank you